The sun hung low over the Texas plains, painting the endless stretch of scrubland in shades of rust and gold. Jonas Miller stood on his porch, watching the day die as he had watched countless others before it. At 53, his face bore the deep lines of a man who'd spent too many years squinting against the harsh western sun, and his calloused hands gripped the porch rail with the unconscious strength of someone who'd known nothing but hard labor. The ranch spread before him, 200 acres of stubborn land that fought him for every blade of grass, every drop of water. It wasn't much, but it was his, or rather, it had been theirs. Now it was just his, and the distinction cut deeper than any blade ever could. Inside the house, supper waited on the stove, beans and salt pork, same as yesterday, same as tomorrow. He'd cook enough for 2 out of habit, then eat alone at the long wooden table his father had built 40 years ago. The extra portion would go to the hogs. They, at least, didn't mind his silence. Jonas turned and walked inside, his boots heavy on the floorboards. The house echoed with emptiness. 4 rooms that once held laughter now held only shadows and dust motes dancing in the fading light. He paused at the doorway to the small bedroom at the back, then moved on without looking inside. Some wounds were too deep to probe, even after 7 years. The cholera had come in 73, sweeping through the county like wildfire through dry grass. It took Martha first, his Martha with her gentle hands and eyes the color of spring sage. She'd fought it hard, fought it with everything she had, but the fever won in the end. He'd held her as she went, whispering promises he couldn't keep about looking after their daughter. Little Sarah had followed her mother 3 days later, 8 years old, with her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin. She'd asked for water at the end, and he'd given it to her drop by precious drop, watching helplessly as the sickness stole her away piece by piece. The doctor said there was nothing to be done. God's will, he'd called it. Jonas hadn't spoken to God since. He ladled beans onto a tin plate and sat at the table, the chair across from him as empty as his chest felt. Outside, a coyote called to the rising moon, its cry lonely and wild. Jonas understood the sound. He'd made it himself, those first nights after the burials, when the weight of loss had driven him to his knees in the dust. The years since had worn him down to essentials. Wake at dawn, feed the stock, mend the fences, work until his body screamed for rest, then work some more. Physical pain was manageable. It was the quiet moments that threatened to undo him, the spaces between tasks when memory crept in like smoke under a door. He'd tried drinking for a while. Half the men in the county dealt with their demons that way. But the whiskey only made the ghosts louder, made Sarah's laugh echo through the empty rooms until he thought he'd go mad. So he'd poured out the bottles and chose work instead. Hard work, endless work. The kind that left a man too tired to dream. The ranch had prospered under his driven care. His cattle were fat, his horses strong. The Jing never ran dry, even in the drought years. Neighbors spoke of Jonas Miller with respect. A hard man, they said, but fair, reliable. They didn't speak of the man he'd been before, the one who'd smiled easily and danced with his wife in the kitchen after supper. That man had been buried with Martha and Sarah in the small cemetery on the hill. Jonas finished his meal and washed his plate in the basin. The water was tepid, filmed with the day's dust. Everything out here was touched by dust, the furniture, the windows, his very soul. He sometimes wondered if he'd simply dry up and blow away one day, become part of the endless Texas wind. He stepped back onto the porch as darkness settled over the land. The stars emerged one by one, ancient and indifferent. When he was young, his mother had told him the stars were windows to heaven. Sarah had believed that, had pointed to the brightest ones and claimed she could see angels dancing. He'd let her believe it. Now he saw them for what they were, distant suns, cold and unreachable, caring nothing for the small sufferings of men. A barn owl called from the rafters of the stable, and Jonas remembered he hadn't checked on the mare. She was due to foal any day, and though she was an old hand at it, complications could arise. He lit a lantern and made his way across the yard, his shadow long and wavering in the yellow light. The mare stood quiet in her stall. sides swollen with promise. Jonas ran a practiced hand along her flank, feeling for signs of distress. She nickered softly and nuzzled his shoulder, seeking the sugar cube she knew he carried. He gave it to her, scratching behind her ears the way Sarah used to. "Soon now, girl," he murmured. "You'll have your baby soon." The words caught in his throat. Everywhere on this ranch was memory. Every board, every stone, every animal carried the ghost of his former life. He'd thought about selling, moving somewhere without these constant reminders. But this land held Martha's grave, Sarah's grave. Leaving would be the final abandonment. He finished his rounds and returned to the house. The bedroom waited, with its narrow bed and thin blanket. He used to sleep on the left side, leaving space for Martha even years after she'd gone. Now he slept in the middle, sprawled across the emptiness, claiming all the space because there was no one left to share it with. As he pulled off his boots, Jonas caught sight of himself in the small mirror above the washstand. The face that looked back was weathered as old leather, eyes that had seen too much and felt too deeply. He barely recognized himself some days. The young man who'd brought Martha west, full of dreams and certainty, was as dead as she was. What remained was this husk, this animated corpse that went through the motions of living without truly being alive. He lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. The wind whispered through the gaps in the walls. These sounds had once been comforting, the music of home. Now they were just noise, filling the spaces where voices should have been. Tomorrow would be the same as today. He'd rise, work, eat, sleep. The seasons would turn. The cattle would grow fat for market. The land would demand its due in sweat and blood. And he'd pay it gladly because the alternative was stopping. And stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering how it felt to be happy. Jonas closed his eyes, willing sleep to come. In the morning, there would be work. There was always work. It was the only thing that kept the emptiness at bay. The only truth left in a world that had taken everything else from him. He didn't know, couldn't know, that tomorrow would be different. That a small voice would shatter 7 years of careful numbness. That a pair of desperate eyes would look at him and see not the walking dead man he'd become, but salvation. For now, there was only the darkness, the silence, and the slow, steady breathing of a man who'd forgotten how to hope. The afternoon heat pressed down like a flat iron, making the air shimmer over the dusty yard. Jonas had been mending the fence along the north pasture since dawn. His shirt soaked through with sweat. The work was mindless. Automatic, drive the post, string the wire, move on. He'd done it so many times his hands knew the rhythm without his mind's involvement. He was reaching for another strand of wire when he heard it, a sound so soft it might have been the wind, except the air hung still as death. He straightened, squinting toward the house. There, again, a voice, thin as paper, coming from the direction of the porch. Jonas dropped his tools and walked toward the house, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. As he rounded the corner of the barn, he stopped short. A child stood at the bottom of his porch steps, swaying slightly like a reed in water. A girl, though it was hard to tell at first through the dirt and grime. Her dress hung in tatters, more holes than fabric, and her bare feet were black with road dust. But it was her face that made Jonas's breath catch hollow cheeks, cracked lips, and eyes that seemed too large for her small face. The whites visible all around the gray irises like a spooked horse. She was trying to speak, her mouth moving, but no sound came out. Jonas took a step closer, and she flinched back, nearly falling. He stopped, holding his hands out slowly, the way he'd approach a wild animal. "Easy there," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "I won't hurt you." The child's lips moved again. And this time, he caught the words, so faint they might have been imagination. "Can I have just crumbs?" The words hit Jonas like a physical blow. He felt something crack inside his chest, a dam that had held for 7 years suddenly developing fissures. His knees went weak, and he had to grab the porch rail to steady himself. "Just crumbs?" he repeated, his voice thick. "Child, when's the last time you ate?" She shook her head, either unable or unwilling to answer. Her whole body trembled despite the heat, and Jonas could see the sharp angles of her bones through the thin fabric of her dress. She looked like Sarah might have looked if he'd failed her, if he'd let her starve instead of the sickness taking her. "Come on," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Let's get you inside." He climbed the steps slowly, aware of how he must look to her, a giant of a man, sun-darkened and rough. When he reached the door, he held it open and stepped back, giving her space. She hesitated, looking from him to the dark interior of the house. "There's food," he said, "and water, cool water from the well." At the mention of water, her tongue darted out to wet her cracked lips. She took a tentative step up, then another, moving like an old woman instead of a child. Jonas guessed her age at maybe 10 or 11, though hunger had a way of making children look both older and younger than their years. Inside. She stopped just past the threshold, blinking in the dimness. Jonas moved past her to the kitchen, pumping water into a cup. When he turned back, she hadn't moved, stood there like she expected to be thrown out at any moment. "Here," he said, holding out the cup. "Drink it slow." She took it with both hands, which shook so badly water sloshed over the rim. The first sip made her cough, but she kept drinking, her eyes never leaving his face. When the cup was empty, he filled it again. "What's your name?" he asked as she drank. She lowered the cup slightly. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara May. Where's your folks?" "Clara May?" Her face crumpled, and Jonas wished he could take the question back. "Gone," she said. "The fever took them 2 summers past." 2 summers. This child had been alone for 2 years. Jonas felt anger kindle in his chest. Not at her, but at a world that could let this happen. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair at the table. "I'll fix you something to eat." He turned to the stove, where the perpetual pot of beans simmered. But beans wouldn't do, not for a stomach that empty. He opened the cupboard and found the last of the bread. Only a day old. There was butter in the cool box, and a jar of preserves Martha had made that he'd never opened. His hands shook as he spread butter on the bread, thick as mortar. When he set the plate before her, Clara May stared at it like it might disappear. Her hand hovered over the bread, trembling. "Go on," Jonas said. "It's yours." She picked up a slice with infinite care and took the smallest bite he'd ever seen a child take. Her eyes closed as she chewed, and tears began sliding down her dirty cheeks. She ate slowly, methodically, as if she'd learned that eating too fast meant pain. Jonas watched, his throat tight. Halfway through the first slice, she stopped and looked up at him. "Is this real?" The question broke what was left of Jonas's composure. He turned away, ostensibly to get her more water, but really to hide the moisture in his own eyes. Sarah had never had to question if food was real. She'd never known hunger like this. "It's real," he managed. "And there's more when you're ready." As Clara May ate, Jonas noticed things he'd missed in his first shock. The rope burns on her thin wrists, the bruise along her jaw, faded to yellow-green. The way she kept glancing at the door like she expected someone to burst through it. "Clara May," he said carefully. "Who's looking after you?" She went still, the bread halfway to her mouth. "Nobody," she said, but her eyes darted away. "Those marks on your wrists. Who did that?" Her whole body began to shake. "I can't. They'll find me. They always find me." "Who finds you?" She shook her head violently, pressing back against the chair. Jonas held up his hands. "All right," he said. "You don't have to say, 'You're safe here.'" But even as he said it, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through the kitchen window, he could see the road that ran past his property. 3 men on horseback had stopped there, looking toward the house. They were too far away to make out details, but something about their stillness, their watching, raised the hair on Jonas's neck. Clara May followed his gaze and went white as salt. A whimper escaped her throat. Is that them? Jonas asked quietly. The ones who hurt you, she nodded, shrinking into herself. Mr. Silas and his brothers, they say I owe them. Say my papa owed them money 'fore he died, and now I got to work it off. But Papa never borrowed nothing from nobody. Jonas knew the type. Vultures who preyed on the helpless, using fake debts and forged papers to claim what wasn't theirs. He'd heard stories of orphans disappeared into labor camps, or worse, working until they dropped for debts that never existed. How long they been chasing you? Since I run off 3 days ago. They had me working at their place since Papa died. Said I was bound to them legal-like, but I heard them talking. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Heard them say they was gonna sell me to some men heading for Mexico. Said I'd fetch a good price, young as I am. Jonas's hands clenched into fists. He forced them to relax, not wanting to scare her more. Outside, the men hadn't moved, still watching the house like buzzards waiting for something to die. Listen to me, Clara May, he said, keeping his voice steady. You see that room there? He pointed to the back bedroom, the one he never entered. You go in there and stay quiet. Lock the door from inside. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Understand? But they won't touch you. Not while I'm breathing. Something in his voice must have convinced her. She slipped off the chair and padded to the bedroom, pausing at the door to look back at him. In that moment, with the late afternoon light catching her face, she looked so much like Sarah that Jonas had to grip the table's edge. Thank you, she whispered, and disappeared inside. He heard the lock click. Jonas stood slowly, his joints protesting. He walked to the cabinet where he kept his guns, selecting the Colt .45 and checking the chambers, all loaded. He tucked it into his belt and picked up the shotgun, breaking it open to verify both barrels held shells. The men were riding up the path now, taking their time. Jonas stepped onto the porch and leaned the shotgun against the rail, within easy reach, but not threatening. Not yet. They reined up 20 feet from the porch. The one in front was lean as a knife blade, with pale eyes that never seemed to blink. The other two were clearly brothers, sharing the same heavy features and cruel mouths. All three wore their guns low, the mark of men who used them regular. Afternoon, the pale-eyed one said. His voice was soft, cultured even, which somehow made it worse. Name's Silas Crane. These are my associates, Lem and Porter. Jonas said nothing, just watched them with the same expression he used for rattlesnakes. Silas smiled, showing too many teeth. We're looking for some lost property. Little girl, about 10 years old, skinny thing, brown hair. You seen anyone like that? No, Jonas said. You sure about that? See, we tracked her to this area. Seems mighty strange she'd just disappear. Lot of strange things in this world. Jonas said, Girl alone out here. Anything could have happened. Coyotes, maybe, rattlers, heat stroke. Hard country for a child. Silas's smile widened. That's a real shame if true. See, she owes us for her upkeep. Her daddy died owing us considerable money. We got papers saying she's bound to work it off. That's so? Legal and proper. Judge in Austin signed off on it. Silas reached into his vest, and Jonas's hand drifted toward his gun. But the man only pulled out a folded document. You want to see? No need. I told you. Haven't seen any girl. The three men exchanged glances. Porter, the larger of the brothers, shifted in his saddle. Mister, he said, you wouldn't be lying to us, would you? 'Cause that would be interfering with legal recovery of property. That's a hanging offense in some parts. Jonas smiled for the first time in 7 years. It wasn't a pleasant expression. This is my land you're on. In these parts, threatening a man on his own land is cause for shooting. Now, I've been polite, but you're starting to wear on that politeness. Silas raised a hand, calming his associate. No need for unpleasantness. But see, we know she came this way. Little bird like that. She can't have gone far. Mind if we look around? Check your barn. Maybe? I do mind, Jonas said. I mind considerable. The silence stretched between them. taut as wire. Jonas could feel the weight of the Colt against his hip. The shotgun within reach. 3 against 1 wasn't good odds, but he'd faced worse. And he had something they didn't, a reason to fight that went deeper than money or meanness. Finally, Silas touched his hat brim. "We'll be going then. But Mr. Miller, Mr. Miller, we'll be camping just up the road a piece. If that little girl should happen to show up here, well, you'd be doing the legal thing by letting us know. Might even be a reward in it for you." "I'll keep that in mind," Jonas said. They turned their horses and rode away slowly, and Jonas knew it was a show. They'd be back. Men like that didn't give up easy, especially when there was profit involved. He watched until they were out of sight, then went back inside. He knocked softly on the bedroom door. "It's all right. They're gone." The lock clicked, and Clara May peered out, her face white with fear. "They'll come back," she said. "They always come back." "Let them," Jonas said, and was surprised to find he meant it. For 7 years he'd been waiting to die, going through the motions of living. Now, suddenly, he had something to protect, someone who needed him. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you properly fed, and maybe find you some clean clothes." As he led her back to the kitchen, Jonas felt something he hadn't felt in years, purpose. It scared him almost as much as it exhilarated him. But looking at this broken child who'd asked for nothing but crumbs, he knew there was no going back. The dead man he'd been was gone. In his place stood someone he barely recognized, someone willing to fight, to protect, maybe even to hope again. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood. It seemed fitting. Before this was over, there might well be blood spilled, but for the first time in 7 years, Jonas Miller was truly alive. The evening settled over the ranch like a held breath. Jonas had found some of Sarah's old clothes in the trunk he'd sworn never to open again. A simple calico dress, faded but clean, and a pair of small boots that were only a little too big for Clara May. She'd changed behind the bedroom door while he heated water for her to wash. And when she emerged, the transformation was remarkable. Beneath the dirt and despair was a pretty child with intelligent gray eyes and dark hair that, once cleaned, showed hints of auburn in the lamplight. She sat at the table now, working her way through a bowl of stew with the same careful deliberation she'd shown with the bread. Jonas had pulled his chair to the window where he could watch the road. The Winchester stood loaded by the door, and the Colt hadn't left his hip. "Mr. Miller," Clara May said softly. "You got a family?" The question caught him off guard. "Had," he said after a moment. "Lost them to the cholera. I'm sorry." She paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. "My mama went the same way. Papa followed her 2 days later, said he couldn't bear to stay without her." Jonas understood that feeling too well. "How'd you end up with Crane and his men?" Clara May set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. "After Papa died, I tried to make it on my own, stayed in our little house outside Bracken. But the sheriff came one day, said the bank was taking it for debts. I told him Papa didn't owe nobody nothing, but he had papers." She twisted her hands in her lap. "That's when Mr. Silas showed up. Said he'd bought Papa's debt from the bank, and since I was Papa's only kin, the debt passed to me. That's not how debt works." Jonas said, "Children don't inherit their parents' obligations. That's what Mrs. Hartley said. She was our neighbor, but when she tried to argue, they showed her more papers, legal documents, they said, had a judge's seal and everything. Mrs. Hartley couldn't read so good, and neither could I. They took me that same day." Jonas felt his jaw clench. It was an old scheme, but effective. Forge some documents, find a corrupt judge to make them official. And who would stand up for an orphan girl? Who had the money for lawyers or the power to fight back? "What did they have you doing?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Cooking, cleaning, washing. They had a place about 30 miles west, an old trading post they'd taken over. Other children there too, mostly Mexican, some Indian. We worked from before sun up to past dark. They fed us enough to keep us moving, but—" She touched her hollow cheeks. "Never enough to feel strong. Strong children might run. But you ran anyway. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Heard them talking one night. Men had come from across the border, looking for workers for their mines, offering good money for young ones. They said, small hands for small spaces. The smile vanished. They were going to sell us like cattle. All of us. I couldn't. I had to try. The others still there? She nodded miserably. I wanted to help them, but I was so scared. I just ran, left them behind. Tears started sliding down her cheeks. I'm a coward. Jonas moved from the window and knelt beside her chair, his knees protesting. Listen to me, he said firmly. You're 10 years old. 11, she corrected. 11 years old, and you survived 2 years with those monsters. You found the courage to run when you knew they'd come after you. That's not cowardice. Clara May, that's brave as anything I've ever seen. She looked at him with those 2 large eyes. They'll hurt the others because I ran. Mr. Silas. He's got a terrible temper when things don't go his way. Jonas stood, his decision crystallizing. He'd been defending, reactive. But Crane and his kind were like infection. You couldn't just treat the symptoms. You had to cut out the poison at the root. Clara May, I need you to tell me everything about that trading post. How many men, what kind of weapons they carry, the layout of the buildings, everything. Hope flickered in her eyes. You're going to help them? I'm going to try. He returned to the window. Full dark now, but his eyes had adjusted. He could see the faint glow of a campfire up the road. Crane and his brothers, waiting. But first, we need to deal with our immediate problem. As if summoned by his words. Hoofbeats sounded in the darkness. Not 3 horses this time, more like 6 or 7. Jonas grabbed the shotgun and handed Clara May the spare Colt from the drawer. You know how to use this? She nodded. Papa taught me, said a girl ought to know how to protect herself. Smart man, get back in the bedroom. Bar the door. If anybody but me tries to come through, you shoot first and feel bad about it later. Understand? Yes, sir. She took the gun with steady hands and disappeared into the back room. Jonas stepped onto the porch as the riders came into view. 7 men, as he'd guessed. Silas Crane in the lead, his brothers flanking him, and 4 others Jonas didn't recognize. One wore a badge that caught the lamplight from the house. Evening, Miller, Silas called out pleasantly. Sorry to disturb you again, but Sheriff Dawson here insisted on coming along. Seems he's mighty concerned about this missing girl situation. The sheriff was a thin man with a drinker's nose and nervous hands. Jonas had seen his type before, weak men who sold their badges to the highest bidder. Sheriff, Jonas acknowledged. Didn't know the law worked after dark. When it concerns the welfare of a child, Mr. Miller, the law never sleeps. Dawson's voice tried for authority, but came out reedy. Mr. Crane here has shown me legal documents proving his guardianship of one Clara May Hutchins. The girl is a runaway, and harboring her would be a serious crime. I told Crane already. I haven't seen any girl. Now, that's interesting, Silas said, producing something from his saddlebag. Because we found these not 50 feet from your porch. He held up a pair of small, tattered shoes, the ones Clara May had been wearing when she arrived. Seems mighty curious. Wouldn't you say? Jonas cursed inwardly. He should have burned everything immediately. Could be anybody's shoes. Lots of folks pass through. Mr. Miller, the sheriff said, I'm going to have to ask you to let us search your property, for the child's safety. You understand? No? I'm afraid I must insist. I said no. Jonas shifted the shotgun slightly. You got a warrant? Sheriff, signed by a real judge, not some bought and paid for pencil pusher. The sheriff's face flushed. Now see here, because without a warrant, you're just 7 men threatening a law-abiding citizen on his own land. And in Texas, that's cause for shooting. One of the men Jonas didn't know, a scar-faced Mexican with bandoliers across his chest, laughed softly. This old man thinks he can take 7 of us. Old man's got a point about the law. Another said he was young, maybe 20, with the look of someone who'd rather be elsewhere. We ain't got no warrant. Shut up, Harkins. Lem Crane growled. We got all the authority we need. Silas raised a hand for silence. Mr. Miller, let's be reasonable. We know the girl is here. Your own actions confirm it. Now, you seem like a decent man who's been taken in by a convincing story. But that child is a thief and a liar. She's spun tales about us, no doubt, made us out to be monsters. Are you? Jonas asked simply. We're businessmen. We provided food, shelter, and care for orphaned children who would otherwise starve. In exchange, they work to pay off their parents' debts. It's honest labor, nothing more. And the men from Mexico, the ones buying children for the mines? Silas's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and deadly beneath. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Jonas took a step back toward the door. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn those horses around and ride away. Come morning, you're going to keep riding until you're out of the county. And you're going to forget you ever heard of Clara May Hutchins. Or what? Porter Crane spoke up, his hand resting on his gun. You'll shoot us all? Even if you got 2 or 3 of us, the rest would cut you down. Maybe, Jonas agreed. But I guarantee you'd be one of the 2 or 3. Question is, are you willing to die for a skinny little girl who can't bring more than $50 at market? It's not about the money, Silas said quietly. It's about the principle. You let one run, they all get ideas. Besides, she knows things, seen things. Can't have her spreading tales. There it was, the real reason for their persistence. Clara May wasn't just escaped property. She was a witness. Sheriff, Jonas said. You hearing this? Man just admitted to human trafficking in front of a lawman. Dawson shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. I didn't hear nothing but a businessman concerned about his legal rights. The Mexican with the bandoliers drew his pistol casually, not pointing it but letting it rest against his saddle horn. We're wasting time. Let me and the boys handle this. Jefe, 5 minutes. We'll have the girl and this fool will be feeding the coyotes. No killing. The young one, Harkins, said quickly. You said no killing. Mr. Crane, I didn't sign on for murder. Nobody's killing anybody, Silas said, but his pale eyes never left Jonas. Mr. Miller is going to see reason. Aren't you, Miller, going to realize that dying for some stranger's brat isn't worth it? Jonas thought about the weight of the small revolver in Clara May's hands, the trust in her eyes, the way she'd asked for crumbs like it was all she deserved in this world. He thought about Sarah, cold in the ground these 7 years, and all the children like Clara May with nobody to stand for them. You know what? Jonas said conversationally. I've been dead for 7 years, just been too stubborn to lay down. Funny thing about dead men, though we got nothing left to lose. He raised the shotgun, not quite pointing it at anyone, but ready. So here's my counteroffer. You can try to take her. Maybe you succeed, but I promise you this. I'll take at least 3 of you with me, starting with you. Crane. I'm a good shot, and this scattergun don't miss at this range. Your brothers will be burying you come morning. You're bluffing, Lem said. But sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. 7 years ago, I held my daughter while she died, 8 years old, crying for water I couldn't give her fast enough. You think I'm scared of you? Jonas laughed, and it was an ugly sound. Son, I've been praying for someone to put me out of my misery. Only reason I haven't done it myself is the promise I made to my wife. But defending an innocent child from slavers? That's a death worth having. The silence stretched taut. Jonas could hear Clara May moving in the bedroom, probably pressed against the door, listening. He hoped she wouldn't try to help if shooting started. The young one, Harkins, had his hand well away from his gun. The sheriff looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, but the others were coiled tight, waiting for someone to make the first move. Finally. Silas smiled his snake smile. This isn't over, Miller. One way or another, we'll have what's ours. Looking forward to it. Jonas said. They turned their horses, moving with deliberate slowness. Jonas waited until the hoofbeats faded before lowering the shotgun. His hands were steady, but inside he felt hollow. He'd just declared war on 7 armed men, and they'd be back. With more men, probably. And he was one aging rancher with ghosts for company. He knocked on the bedroom door. "They're gone." Clara May emerged, the revolver still clutched in her small hands. "I heard everything," she said. "You should have just let them take me. I'm not worth dying for." Jonas gently took the gun from her and set it on the table. Then he did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He pulled another human being into his arms. She stiffened at first, then melted against him, sobbing like the child she was. "Every life is worth dying for," he said into her hair. "Especially yours. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." They stood there in the lamplight, the broken rancher and the lost child, while outside the Texas night held its breath and waited for what morning would bring. Jonas lit the stove and set water to boil while Clara May sat at the table, her eyes following his every movement. He'd given her an old shawl of Martha's to wrap around her shoulders, and she clutched it like armor against the world. The night pressed against the windows, full of threat and possibility. "You hungry?" he asked, though he knew she couldn't be after the stew. It was something to say, something normal in a situation that was anything but, "No, sir." She paused. "Maybe some tea. Mama used to make tea when things got bad." Jonas found the tin of tea leaves, dusty from disuse. Martha had loved her evening tea, said it settled the nerves. He'd thrown out so many of her things in those first black months, but somehow the tea had survived. "Tell me about your parents," he said as he measured the leaves. "What were they like?" A smile ghosted across Clara May's face. "Papa was a clockmaker, had a shop in Bracken, fixed watches and such. His hands were so gentle, could work with the tiniest parts. Mama said he could fix anything except a broken heart." Her smile faded. Guess she was right about that. Jonas poured the hot water over the leaves, the familiar smell filling the kitchen. "And your mama?" "She was a teacher before she married Papa. Taught me my letters and numbers, even though the town said girls didn't need much schooling. She used to read to me every night from this big book of stories." Clara May's fingers traced patterns on the worn tabletop. "I tried to save it when they took me, but Mr. Silas said books were wasteful foolishness." "Man who thinks books are foolish is a fool himself," Jonas said, setting the cup before her. She wrapped her hands around it, breathing in the steam. "Do you have books?" "A few." He'd packed most of them away with Sarah's things, but some remained on the shelf in the parlor. "You're welcome to them." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the tea cooling between them. Finally, Clara May spoke again, her voice smaller than before. "Those other children at the trading post, there's a boy named Miguel, maybe 7 years old. He cries for his mama every night. And Lucy, she's only 5. Mr. Silas took her from some travelers passing through, claimed they owed him for supplies." She looked up at Jonas with haunted eyes. "They're so scared, Mr. Miller, and so hungry. We all were, all the time." "How many children?" 8 when I left, sometimes more, sometimes less. Depends on—" She trailed off. "On who gets sold," Jonas finished grimly. She nodded. "The men from Mexico. They come every few months. Take the strongest ones, usually. But last time, they were looking for young ones. Said the smaller, the better for what they needed." Jonas felt rage build in his chest, hot and clean. He'd known evil existed in the world, had seen it in the war, in the random cruelty of disease. But this calculated exploitation of children was something else entirely. "Clara May," he said carefully, "I need you to understand something. Those men will come back, and when they do, it's likely to get violent. This isn't your fault, but I won't lie to you. Staying here puts you in danger." "Being alive puts me in danger," she said with a wisdom too heavy for her years. "Least here, someone cares what happens to me." The simple statement hit Jonas like a physical blow. He cleared his throat, looking away. It's been a long time since I took care of anyone." "You're doing fine so far." He almost smiled at that. "Let's get you properly settled. That bedroom you were in, it was my daughter's. Haven't opened it in years, so it might be dusty." "You have a daughter?" Hope colored her voice. "Will she mind me using her things?" Jonas stood, buying time by collecting the teacups. "She died, same time as my wife." "Oh." Clara May was quiet for a moment. "What was her name?" "Sarah. Sarah Ann Miller." It had been years since he'd said her name aloud. "She was 8 when the fever took her. Would have been 15 now." "I'm sorry," Clara May said simply. "She was lucky, though." "Lucky?" Jonas couldn't hide his surprise. "How do you figure that? She had a papa who loved her, who still loves her. That's more than a lot of us get." Jonas led her to Sarah's room, lighting the lamp on the dresser. Everything was as he'd left it that terrible day. The quilted bedspread Martha had made, the rag doll on the pillow, Sarah's few dresses hanging on pegs. Dust motes danced in the lamplight like tiny ghosts. "It's beautiful," Clara May breathed. "Like a princess room." Jonas almost laughed. The room was simple, even plain by most standards. But to a child who'd been sleeping on dirt floors and eating scraps, he supposed it might seem palatial. "Let me get some fresh sheets," he said, but Clara May caught his sleeve. Could you tell me about her? Sarah, if it doesn't hurt too much." Jonas sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress creaking under his weight. She loved horses, fearless around them, even the ornery ones. Used to say she was going to raise the finest horses in Texas when she grew up. He picked up the rag doll, its button eyes staring blankly. Her mother made this for her 5th birthday, called it Miss Catherine. Sarah took it everywhere. What else? She couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but loved to sing anyway. Drove her mother to distraction during church services. The memory surprised him with its sweetness rather than pain. Had a gap between her front teeth that showed when she smiled, which was often, and she was kind. Even at 8, she'd give away her lunch to kids who had less. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Jonas set the doll gently back on the pillow. "She would have liked you. I think, would have pestered me to let you stay." Clara May sat beside him, small and careful. "Can I tell you something?" "Course. When those men come back, and they will come back, I don't want to run anymore. Even if bad things happen, I'm tired of running." She looked up at him with those 2 old eyes. "Is that wrong?" Jonas put a hand on her thin shoulder. "No, child. Sometimes a person's got to make a stand, no matter the cost. Just wish you didn't have to learn that so young. Papa used to say courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared." "Your papa sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Clara May yawned suddenly, the events of the day catching up with her. "Mr. Miller, what's going to happen tomorrow?" Jonas stood, pulling back the covers. "Tomorrow, we'll see about getting word to the marshal in Austin. Real law. Not Crane's bought sheriff, and we'll make sure you're safe." She climbed into the bed, looking impossibly small against the pillows. "But what about the others? Miguel and Lucy and—" "One thing at a time," Jonas said gently. "Can't help anyone if we don't survive the night." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. "Mr. Miller, I know I'm not her, not Sarah, but could you maybe love me a little bit anyway? Just for pretend." Jonas gripped the doorframe, unable to turn around because his eyes were suddenly full. When he could trust his voice, he said, "Nothing pretend about it. Clara May, now get some sleep." He closed the door softly and returned to the kitchen, where he loaded every gun in the house and settled in to keep watch. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkness. The wind rattled the windows like searching fingers. And somewhere out there, Silas Crane and his men waited for dawn. Jonas poured himself the last of the tea, now cold and bitter. He thought about Sarah's kindness, about children crying for their mothers in the dark, about a little girl who'd asked for crumbs and found something more. The old Jonas, the dead man walking, would have sent Clara May away to keep his grief intact. But she'd asked if he could love her, just a little, and in asking had cracked open a heart he'd thought frozen forever. He checked the loads in the Winchester again, though he knew they were fine. Come morning, Crane would return with more men. The smart thing would be to run. Take Clara May and head for Austin or San Antonio. Start over somewhere Crane couldn't find them. But Jonas thought about Miguel crying for his mother, about 5-year-old Lucy and the others whose names he didn't yet know, about his own Sarah, who would have given away her lunch to help them. I'm done running too, he said to the empty kitchen. Through the window, the first pale hint of false dawn touched the eastern sky. Soon enough, the test would come. But for now, there was a child sleeping safe in his daughter's bed. And that was enough. That was everything. Jonas Miller sat in his kitchen, cradling cold tea and loaded guns, and waited for the sun to rise on whatever salvation or damnation the new day would bring. The first light of dawn painted the kitchen walls a soft gold when Jonas heard Clara May stirring. He dozed fitfully in his chair, jerking awake at every sound, but the night had passed without incident. Now he rose stiffly, joints protesting, and started fresh coffee. Clara May appeared in the doorway, Sarah's nightgown hanging loose on her thin frame. Her hair was mussed from sleep, but her eyes were alert, scanning the room as if to assure herself she was still safe. Morning, Jonas said. Hungry? She nodded, settling at the table. Did you sleep at all? Some. He cracked eggs into a skillet, adding thick slices of bacon. Been thinking about what you said, about the other children. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He turned to face her. Can't save you and leave them to that fate. Wouldn't be right. But I need to know everything about that trading post. Every detail you can remember. Hope bloomed on her face. You'll help them? Going to try, but first, we eat. Can't plan a campaign on an empty stomach. He set the plate before her. And this time, she didn't hesitate. As she ate, she talked, painting a picture of Crane's operation that made Jonas's blood run cold. The trading post sat in a box canyon 30 miles west. Only one way in or out. Usually 4 or 5 men on guard, rotating shifts. The children slept locked in what used to be a storeroom. No windows, one door with a heavy bar across it. They let us out to work during the day. Clara May said, cooking, cleaning, tending the horses. But always watched, always a gun nearby. What about at night? 2 men usually. One watches the door. One patrols. They get lazy sometimes, especially when they've been drinking. She pushed eggs around her plate. That's how I got away. Porter was supposed to be watching, but he'd been at the whiskey. Fell asleep against the door. Jonas was forming a plan when he heard it. Horses approaching. He moved to the window, counting riders in the growing light. His heart sank. Not 7 this time, 12, and a wagon. Get dressed, he told Clara May urgently. Then back to the bedroom. Bar the door like before. She ran without question. Jonas checked his weapons one more time, then stepped onto the porch as the riders approached. Silas Crane led them, his pale eyes triumphant. Sheriff Dawson rode beside him, looking even more uncomfortable than the night before. The wagon held lumber and tools, coffin-making materials. Jonas realized with grim humor. Morning, Miller. Silas called out cheerfully. Beautiful day, wouldn't you say? Perfect for concluding our business. State your business and be done with it, Jonas replied. Silas dismounted, moving with the easy confidence of a man who held all the cards. Had an interesting conversation with Judge Harwick last night. Seems he was very concerned about a dangerous kidnapper in our midst. Signed a new warrant. He did, for your arrest. He produced a paper with an official seal. Jonas Miller, you're under arrest for kidnapping, assault on a peace officer, and interference with lawful recovery of property. Sheriff Dawson here will take you into custody, and we'll collect the girl. What assault? Jonas asked. I haven't touched anyone. Well, that's strange, Silas said, because Deputy Cole there has a powerful bruise on his jaw. Says you attacked him when he tried to serve papers yesterday evening. Jonas looked at the man indicated, one of the new riders, sporting a fresh bruise that had clearly been self-inflicted or helped along by his companions. "That's a lie and you know it. 7 witnesses say otherwise." Silas smiled. "Including a sheriff and a deputy. Your word against ours? Miller. And you're harboring a known runaway." The trap was neat. Jonas had to admit. They'd used the law to separate him from Clara May. And once they had her, she'd disappear forever. He'd rot in jail or hang for crimes he didn't commit while Crane went back to his evil trade. "I'll need to see that warrant," Jonas said, playing for time. Silas nodded to the sheriff, who dismounted and approached the porch. His hands shook as he held out the paper. Jonas took it, pretending to read while his mind raced. The sun was full up now, sending long shadows across the yard. In the house behind him, he could sense Clara May listening, trusting him to keep her safe. "Seems in order," Jonas said finally. "Just need to get my coat." He turned toward the door, and that's when he heard it, the soft whisper of steel on leather. He spun back to see 3 men drawing their guns, apparently tired of the legal charade. "No!" Sheriff Dawson shouted. "Crane, you said—" Jonas dove sideways as the first shots rang out, splinters exploding from the door frame where he'd been standing. He rolled behind the water trough, the Winchester in his hands without conscious thought. Return fire cracked from the house. Clara May, bless her, shooting through the window despite his orders to hide. The yard erupted in chaos. Horses reared and screamed. Men shouted and cursed, diving for cover. Jonas came up firing, the Winchester bucking against his shoulder. One of Crane's men spun and fell. Another clutched his arm, howling. "Papa Jonas!" The scream froze his blood. He turned to see Clara May on the porch, Porter Crane's massive hand twisted in her hair. She must have tried to get a better angle from the doorway, and he'd been waiting. "Drop the gun, Miller!" Porter shouted, using her as a shield. "Drop it, or I snap her neck!" Everything went still. Jonas could hear his heartbeat, loud as thunder. Clara May's eyes found his, terrified but trusting, waiting for him to save her. In that moment, she wasn't Clara May at all. She was Sarah, crying for water he couldn't give fast enough. "All right," Jonas said, his voice steady. "All right, don't hurt her." He set the Winchester down slowly, straightening with his hands visible. Porter grinned, his grip on Clara May's hair loosening slightly as he felt victory within reach. "That's better. Now, do you think you can maybe love me too?" Clara May's voice was small, almost dreamy. Jonas's eyes locked with hers. "Always, sweetheart." She went limp suddenly, all her weight dropping. Porter, caught off guard, had to adjust his grip. It was only a second, but it was enough. Jonas drew the Colt and fired in one smooth motion. The bullet caught Porter between the eyes, and he toppled backward like a felled tree. "The house!" Jonas roared, scooping up Clara May and diving through the door as bullets peppered the walls around them. Inside, he slammed the door and barred it, then checked Clara May for injuries. She was shaking but unharmed, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I tried to help and I ruined everything." "You did perfect," Jonas said fiercely. "That was brave and smart. Sarah couldn't have done better." Gunfire continued outside, but sporadic now. Jonas risked a glance through the window. 3 bodies lay in the dust. The others had taken cover behind the wagon and outbuildings. A Mexican standoff, except he was outnumbered 9-1. "Miller!" Silas's voice, cold with rage. "You just killed a lawman. That's hanging for certain." "He wasn't wearing a badge," Jonas called back. "Just another of your hired thugs." Sheriff, tell him." There was a pause, then Dawson's reedy voice. "Porter was sworn in as a deputy this morning, legal and proper." Jonas almost laughed. Even now, they clung to their pretense of legality, but it didn't matter. Real or fake, he'd killed the man in front of witnesses. If he survived this, he'd hang for certain. "Clara May," he said quietly, "there's a root cellar under the kitchen, trapdoor beneath that rag rug. You get down there and don't come out until I tell you. But, no arguments. Move! She scrambled for the kitchen. Jonas heard the trapdoor open and close. Then silence. Good. Whatever happened next, she'd have a chance. He checked his ammunition. Not much left. Maybe 20 rounds for the Winchester, fewer for the Colt. Not enough for a prolonged siege. Miller! Silas again. This is your last chance. Send out the girl and surrender yourself. You have my word you'll get a fair trial. Your word isn't worth the spit it takes to say it. Jonas shouted back. Then you'll burn! Jonas smelled smoke before he saw it. They'd fired the barn. His horses screaming inside sent rage through him like lightning. He kicked open the back door and ran for the barn, shooting at anything that moved. A man rose from behind a barrel, and Jonas put him down without breaking stride. The horses burst from the barn in a panic as Jonas threw open the doors. Smoke billowed out, thick and black. His favorite mare, the pregnant one, stumbled and went down in the doorway. Jonas grabbed her halter, hauling with all his strength. Bullets whined around him like angry hornets. Fire raced up his leg as a shot found its mark. He ignored it, dragging the mare clear as the barn roof began to collapse. Another bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to one knee, the Colt still in his hand. Through the smoke, he saw Silas Crane approaching, confident now that his prey was wounded. That pale face showed satisfaction at finally having won. Should have taken my offer. Miller, Silas said, raising his gun. Papa Jonas? Both men turned. Clara May stood in the doorway of the house, the spare Winchester in her small hands. Her face was streaked with tears and soot, but her aim was steady. Get back inside, Jonas shouted. No! Her voice was stronger now. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being scared. Silas smiled his snake smile. You won't shoot me, little girl. You don't have it in you. You killed my parents. Clara May said quietly. They never owed you nothing. You killed them for their house, their land. I heard you laughing about it with Lem. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Silas's eyes. You're confused, child. The fever. There wasn't no fever. You poisoned their well, bragged about how easy it was. Tears ran down her face, but the gun never wavered. You killed them and took me and told everyone it was legal. But I remember everything. Clara May, Jonas said softly. You don't have to do this. Put the gun down. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not a child, but a survivor. Someone who'd endured horrors no one should face and come out the other side. He'll never stop, she said simply. Men like him never stop. Not unless someone stops them. Silas must have seen his death in her eyes because he swung his gun toward her. Jonas threw himself forward, his own weapon rising. 3 shots rang out almost as one. Silas Crane fell backward, 2 holes in his chest, one from Jonas's Colt, one from Clara May's rifle. His pale eyes stared at the sky. Seeing nothing, Jonas collapsed beside him, his leg and shoulders screaming. Dimly, he heard more horses, lots of them. New voices shouting orders. Clara May's small hands on his face, her voice calling his name. It's all right, he mumbled. You're safe now. That's all that matters. Don't you die on me, she said fiercely. You promised you could love me. You can't love me if you're dead. Papa Jonas, please. The last thing he heard before darkness took him was her voice. Not asking for crumbs this time, but demanding he stay. Demanding he live. Demanding he keep his promise. And somewhere in the darkness, he thought he heard another voice. Sarah's voice saying, She's right, Papa. You can't love her if you're dead, so you better live. So he held on, held tight to the sound of Clara May calling him Papa, and refused to let go. The sun climbed higher into the Texas sky, beating down mercilessly on the chaos in Jonas's yard. Through the haze of pain and smoke, he heard new voices, authoritative, organized. Not Crane's rabble, but real lawmen. His vision swam as Clara May pressed something against his shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. Stay with me, she pleaded. Help's here, real help. A face appeared above him, weathered, with keen eyes and a marshal's star on his vest. "Sam Garrett, you as marshal," the man said. "Looks like we got here just in time." The girl, Jonas managed, "Keep her safe." "She's safe," Garrett assured him. "Nobody's taking her anywhere. You have my word on that." Strong hands lifted Jonas, and he bit back a scream as they moved him into the house. Someone with medical knowledge started working on his wounds while Marshal Garrett questioned Clara May in the kitchen. Jonas caught fragments of conversation, her clear voice recounting everything from her parents' murder to the trading post full of captive children. "How many men still there?" Garrett asked. "Usually 4 or 5. Clara May answered, "Mr. Silas took most everyone here. Then we might catch them off guard." Garrett raised his voice. "Henderson, take 10 men and ride for that trading post, fast as you can. There are children there need rescuing." Jonas tried to sit up. "I'm going with them." The doctor, a young man with gentle hands, pushed him back down. "You're not going anywhere except to bed. That leg needs proper tending, and you've lost considerable blood." "Listen to the doc," Garrett said, entering the room. "We'll handle Crane's operation, though from what I see outside, you handled a fair portion yourself." "How did you know to come?" Jonas asked. "Letter arrived in Austin 2 days ago. Anonymous, but detailed. Listed Crane's crimes, the fake papers, the connection to Sheriff Dawson. Even mentioned a rancher named Miller might be in danger for protecting a runaway." Garrett's eyes found Clara May, who stood in the doorway. "Funny thing, the handwriting looked like a child's." Clara May flushed. "I wrote it before I ran. Gave it to a traveling preacher. Asked him to mail it when he reached Austin. Didn't know if it would work." "Smart girl," Garrett said. "Your letter started an investigation. We were already heading this way when we heard the gunfire." The afternoon passed in a blur. Jonas drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of activity around him but unable to focus. Clara May never left his side, her small hand clutching his whenever he surfaced. Once, he woke to find her reading from a book, one of Sarah's old fairy tale collections. "And the princess asked the king if she could stay in the castle," she read softly. "And the king said yes, because he had been lonely for so long. And she reminded him of the daughter he had lost. Near sunset, Marshal Garrett returned with news. 'We got them,' he said. 'Every last one at the trading post. And the children are safe, 8 of them. Just like Miss Clara May said, they're being taken to Austin, where we'll find proper homes for them.' 'Miguel?' Clara May asked anxiously. 'And Lucy?' 'Both fine. Asking for you. Matter of fact, that boy Miguel especially. Seems you were kind to him.' Clara May's eyes filled with tears. 'Can I see them?' 'Once, mister. Miller's well enough to travel. We'll all go to Austin together. Need your testimony for the trials anyway.' Garrett turned to Jonas. 'You'll need to testify too, about Crane's attempt on your life and his confession regarding the Hutchins murders.' 'What about Sheriff Dawson?' 'In custody, singing like a bird about Crane's operations. Seems he's more scared of hanging than he was of Crane.' Garrett settled into a chair. 'You did a brave thing. Miller, stupid, maybe, but brave. Taking on that many men for a child you just met.' Jonas looked at Clara May. Wasn't just any child. Night fell, bringing blessed coolness. The doctor had cleaned and dressed Jonas's wounds, declaring that while painful, they'd heal clean if he rested. Clara May had finally been persuaded to eat something and wash the smoke from her face. Now she sat beside his bed again, looking younger and more vulnerable in the lamplight. "Mr. Miller?" she said softly. "Can I ask you something?" "Course." "Did you mean it? What you said during the fight? About loving me always?" Jonas reached out with his good arm and took her hand. "Every word. But I'm not her, not Sarah. I won't ever be her. Don't want you to be." Jonas squeezed her fingers gently. "Sarah was Sarah, and I'll love her till I die. But you're Clara May, and there's room in this busted old heart for you too." Your own space. Not sharing with anyone. She was quiet for a moment. I killed a man today. You defended yourself and me both. Nothing wrong in that. I thought I'd feel bad about it, but I don't. Does that make me wicked? Jonas thought carefully before answering. Makes you human. Silas Crane was evil. Clara May, he hurt you, killed your folks. Would have killed us both and slept sound after. Feeling bad about stopping someone like that don't make you good, just makes you foolish. Mama would have said to forgive him. Turn the other cheek. Your mama sounds like she was a good Christian woman. But even the Bible says there's a time for everything. A time to forgive and a time to fight. Today was a fighting time. Clara May nodded slowly. What happens now? After Austin? I guess they'll find me a family to work for. Maybe a good one this time. Jonas pushed himself up despite the pain. Clara May Hutchins, you listen to me. You're not going anywhere unless you want to. This is your home now. If you'll have it, papers or no papers, legal or not, you're my daughter from here on out. Anyone tries to take you away will have to go through me. But I'm not. We're not blood. Family's more than blood. It's choice. I choose you. Clara May, question is, do you choose me? Ranch life's hard. I'm not much for conversation. And I can't cook worth spit. But I promise you'll never go hungry again. Never have to ask for crumbs. Everything I have is yours. Clara May's tears came then. Not the tears of fear or pain, but of relief so profound it shook her small frame. She threw her arms around his neck, careful of his wounded shoulder. Papa Jonas, she whispered. Yes, I choose you too. They stayed like that for a long moment. The broken rancher and the lost girl who'd found each other in the vast emptiness of Texas. Outside, Garrett's men kept watch, ensuring no remnants of Crane's gang would disturb them. The house that had echoed with loneliness for 7 years now held the quiet sounds of newfound family. There's something else, Jonas said when Clara May finally pulled back. That trading post of Crane's, the land it's on will be forfeit, seized by the law. I'm thinking of buying it. Why would you want that awful place? Not the place, the location. It's good land, despite what was done there. Thought maybe we could tear down those buildings, put up new ones, make it a proper horse ranch. You said you like horses. Clara May's eyes widened. Really? Really. Something good ought to come from that ground, and we'll need help running it. Might be some of those other children, the ones who don't find families. Could work for us. Proper work for proper wages, not slavery. Give them a chance to build something. Like a big family. Something like that. What do you think? Clara May wiped her eyes and smiled, the first real, full smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, showing the pretty young woman she'd become someday. I think Mama and Papa would like that, and Sarah too. Jonas smiled back. I think you're right. Marshal Garrett knocked and entered. Sorry to interrupt, but there's some men from town here. Heard what happened. Want to know if you need anything? Tell them we're fine, Jonas said. Actually, Clara May spoke up. We need lumber to rebuild the barn. And maybe someone who can cook. Papa Jonas admits he's not much good at it, and I only know basics. Garrett chuckled. I'll pass that along. Suspect you'll have more help than you know what to do with. Folks around here don't take kindly to men like Crane. They'll want to show their support. After he left, Jonas looked at Clara May with amusement. Papa Jonas admits. She blushed. Was that too forward? No, it was perfect. He settled back against the pillows, exhaustion pulling at him. You should get some rest too. Long day tomorrow. Can I stay here, just till you fall asleep? I could read more from the book. I'd like that. Clara May opened the fairy tale book again, her voice soft in the lamplight. But Jonas found himself watching her instead of listening to the story. This morning he'd been a dead man walking, waiting for an end. Now he had a daughter again, a future to build, a reason to heal. Papa Jonas, Clara May paused in her reading. You're crying. Happy tears, he said, and found it was true. Sometimes those need to fall too. She nodded wisely and continued reading about princesses and dragons and happily ever after. And Jonas Miller, who'd thought his story ended 7 years ago, discovered it had simply been waiting for the right chapter to begin. Dawn came gray and humid, with storm clouds building on the horizon. Jonas woke to find Clara May asleep in the chair beside his bed, the fairy tale book open in her lap. Her face, peaceful in sleep, showed none of the terror from yesterday. He tried to shift without waking her, but pain shot through his shoulder and he couldn't suppress a grunt. Her eyes flew open immediately, alert and worried. "Are you hurting? Should I get the doctor?" "Just stiff," Jonas assured her. "Nothing that won't mend." She helped him sit up, fussing with the pillows like a little mother. Through the window, Jonas could see Marshal Garrett's men breaking camp. Today they'd leave for Austin Jonas to testify, Clara May to give her witness, and both to see about making their unconventional family legal in the eyes of the law. "I need to step out back," Jonas said, embarrassed by the necessity. "I'll help you." "Clara May, you can barely walk. Would you rather fall and tear open those wounds?" She fixed him with a stern look that reminded him painfully of Martha. "Pride's a foolish reason to hurt yourself worse." So he accepted her help, leaning on her small shoulder as they made their slow way outside. The morning air was thick with the promise of rain. In the distance, thunder rumbled like wagon wheels on a rough road. They were halfway back to the house when Jonas heard it. Horses approaching fast from the west. Not from town, but from the direction of Crane's trading post. His blood went cold. "Get to the house," he told Clara May. "Get the rifle." But she was already moving, supporting him with surprising strength as they hurried toward the porch. Marshal Garrett emerged from the barn, his hand on his pistol. "Riders coming in hard." One of his men called out, "6, maybe 7. Jonas's mind raced. Crane was dead. His brothers too. But there'd been men left at the trading post when Henderson rode out yesterday. If they'd gotten warning somehow, fled before the marshal's men arrived. The riders burst into view, and Jonas's finger found the trigger of the Colt Clara May had pressed into his hand. Then he paused. These weren't hard cases or hired guns. They were Marshall's men, and they were riding like the devil himself was chasing them. Henderson reined up hard in the yard, his horse lathered with sweat. "Marshal, we've got problems." "What kind of problems?" Garrett demanded. "We were too late. Someone warned them, probably right after Crane left yesterday. The trading post was empty, the children gone." Henderson's face was grim. "But that's not the worst of it. We found tracks heading north. A lot of horses, a wagon. They're making for the Red River. Marshal, for the nations. Indian territory. Once Crane's remaining men crossed into the nations with those children, getting them back would be 10 times harder. The law got complicated across that border, and men could disappear into the wild country for months or years." "How much of a lead?" Garrett asked. 8 hours, maybe 10. But they've got a wagon full of kids. That'll slow them." Henderson glanced at the storm clouds. "This weather might slow them more. Roads turn to mud in the nations when it rains." Garrett was already barking orders, his men saddling fresh horses. But Jonas could see the doubt in his eyes. 8 hours was a significant lead, and if the slavers reached the nations, "I know a shortcut," Clara May said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "When they first took me to the trading post," she continued, "we went through Skeleton Canyon. It's rough, but it cuts 10 miles off the journey. They won't take the wagon that way, too narrow. They'll have to go around. You could catch them," Jonas said to Garrett. "Take the canyon route, get ahead of them. If the girl's right about the route." Garrett studied Clara May. "You sure about this, miss?" "I'm sure. There's a split in the canyon about halfway through. Stay left. The right leads to a box end." She twisted her hands together. "Miguel and Lucy are with them. All the others too. We can't let them disappear." Garrett made his decision. "Henderson, pick 6 men, best riders, best shots. We ride in 10 minutes. He turned to Jonas. "You'll have to follow when you're able. Can't wait for a wounded man." "I'm going," Jonas said. Like hell you are. You can barely stand. I can sit a horse. Jonas straightened despite the screaming protest from his wounds. Those bastards were going to sell Clara May. I'm not sitting here while they do it to other children. Papa Jonas, Clara May started. No arguments. He looked at her with all the stern love he could muster. You stay here with the doctor and the men Garrett leaves behind. I'll be back. You promised, she said, her voice small but fierce. You promised you could love me. You can't do that if you're dead. And you taught me that sometimes a person's got to make a stand. He touched her cheek gently. I'm coming back, Clara May, but those children need help now. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Take Duchess. She's the bay mare in the corral. Smoothest gait we have, and she's smart. Saved my life more than once. 20 minutes later, Jonas sat atop Duchess, trying not to show how much every movement hurt. The doctor had rewrapped his wounds tight, muttering about foolish men and death wishes. Clara May had helped him into an oilskin slicker against the coming rain. The canyon floods in heavy rain, she warned. If the storm hits while you're in there. We'll be through before then, Jonas said with more confidence than he felt. She handed him a packet wrapped in cloth. Food for the trail. And Papa Jonas. She looked up at him with those two old eyes. That shortcut I told you about? There's something else. About 2 miles into the canyon, there's a high shelf on the left. Natural defensive position. If I were running from someone and wanted to make a stand. Jonas leaned down and kissed the top of her head. You're too smart by half, girl. I'll watch for it. Bring them home, she said simply. Bring them all home. The riders set out as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Jonas gritted his teeth against the pain, focusing on the rhythm of Duchess's gait. Around him, Garrett's men rode in grim silence, knowing what stakes they faced. The entrance to Skeleton Canyon was a narrow crack in the hills, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. As they entered, the rain began in earnest, turning the sandy bottom to mud. The walls rose sheer on either side, the gray stone slick and forbidding. This is a death trap if they're waiting for us, Henderson muttered. They don't know about the shortcut. Garrett replied. Crane kept the girl under close watch. Doubt she had time to share secrets. But Jonas remembered Clara May's warning about the shelf. These were desperate men with everything to lose. Desperate men did desperate things. They'd gone maybe a mile when Jonas noticed the change in the horse's behavior. Ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. Duchess snorted and tossed her head, trying to warn him. Marshal, Jonas began. The shot came from above, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. Henderson's horse screamed and went down. More shots followed, raining from the rocks above. Jonas threw himself from the saddle as bullets sparked off stones around him. Take cover, Garrett roared. Jonas pressed himself against the canyon wall, his shoulder screaming protest. Above, he could make out muzzle flashes. 3, maybe 4 shooters on that shelf Clara May had warned about. They had the high ground and clear fields of fire. This could turn into a massacre. Can we go back? One of the men shouted. They'll pick us off one by one, Garrett answered. Forward's the only way. Jonas studied the canyon wall. The stone was rough, weathered, climbable, maybe, if a man was whole, with his wounds. Thunder crashed overhead, drowning out the gunfire for a moment. The rain came harder now, turning the canyon into a gray curtain of water. And Jonas heard something else, a sound that turned his blood cold. A roar, distant but growing closer. Flash flood, he bellowed. The canyon's flooding. Now they were truly trapped, gunmen above, floodwaters coming from behind. Jonas made his decision. He grabbed the rope from his saddle and started climbing. Using cracks and projections in the stone, his wounded leg shrieked with every movement. His shoulder felt like it was tearing apart, but he climbed. Miller, what the hell are you doing? Garrett shouted. Jonas didn't answer, couldn't spare the breath. Hand over hand, foot by painful foot. The shooting from above slackened as the gunmen realized someone was climbing toward them. Bullets chipped stone near his head, but the angle was bad for them. His hand found the lip of the shelf. Jonas hauled himself up and over, rolling as he cleared the edge. 4 men crouched behind rocks. So focused on the marshal's men below, they'd let him get too close. The nearest turned, swinging his rifle. Jonas shot him before he could finish the movement. The second managed to get a shot off, the bullet burning across Jonas's ribs. Jonas put him down and kept moving. The third man, younger than the others, threw down his gun. "Don't shoot, please!" "Where are the children?" Jonas demanded, his Colt steady despite his shaking hands. "Gone ahead with Lem. He took them and 3 men, left us to slow any pursuit." The young man was crying now. "I didn't sign on for killing kids. Mister, I swear I didn't know." The 4th gunman made a break for it. Running along the shelf, Jonas let him go. The flood would deal with him soon enough. Below, he could see the marshal's men mounting up, the water already ankle-deep and rising. "The children," Jonas pressed. "How far ahead?" "Maybe 2 miles. But mister, that water—" Jonas was already lowering himself back down, ignoring the screaming protest from his body. Garrett caught him as he reached the bottom. "That was the damnedest fool thing I've ever seen." The marshal said, "Also the bravest. Can you ride?" "Can I breathe? Then I can ride." They mounted and spurred forward, racing the water that chased them like a living thing. The canyon walls blurred past, the horses struggling in the deepening mud. Jonas held tight to Duchess's mane, trusting the mare to find her footing. Then, blessed relief. The canyon widened, opened. They burst out onto a plateau as the flood waters spread and slowed behind them. And there, not a quarter-mile ahead, a covered wagon struggled through the mud, 4 riders around it. "That's them!" Garrett shouted. The riders had seen them too. 2 peeled off, charging back with guns drawn. Garrett's men met them with a volley of fire. Jonas focused on the wagon, on the man whipping the team mercilessly. Lem Crane, trying to reach the tree line ahead. Jonas spurred Duchess forward. The mare responded magnificently. Churning through the mud like it was nothing, they drew alongside the wagon. Jonas could hear children crying inside, terrified voices calling for help. Lem Crane turned, his face twisted with rage and fear. He raised a scattergun, but Jonas was already moving. He leaped from Duchess to the wagon seat, his momentum carrying them both off the other side. They hit the mud hard, rolling and fighting. Crane was bigger, stronger, unhurt. But Jonas had something the other man didn't, the image of Clara May asking for crumbs, of children locked in a dark room crying for their mothers. He fought with desperate fury, managing to get his hands around Crane's throat. "This is for Clara May's parents," he snarled. "And for every child you've hurt." Crane's eyes bulged. His hands clawed at Jonas's arms, then went for a knife at his belt. Jonas saw the blade flash, felt it bite into his side. But he didn't let go, couldn't let go, not until Crane's struggles weakened, stopped. Jonas rolled away, gasping. Around him, the battle was ending. Garrett's men had overwhelmed the slavers. The marshal himself was at the wagon, cutting the children free. Small faces peered out, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. "Miguel," Jonas called out weakly. "Lucy?" A small boy scrambled down from the wagon, followed by an even smaller girl. They stood uncertain in the rain until Jonas held out his arms. Then they ran to him. These children he'd never met, but had risked everything to save. "You're Clara May's papa?" Miguel asked in accented English. "I am. She said you'd come. Said you were brave and good and wouldn't let them take us." Jonas held the children as his strength faded, as the doctor Garrett had brought worked frantically to stop the bleeding from this new collection of wounds. The rain had gentled to a drizzle, and somewhere above the clouds, he thought he could see a patch of blue. "Going to be all right," he mumbled. "All of you, going to be all right." The last thing he heard before darkness claimed him was Miguel's voice, young and fierce. "Don't die. Señor, Clara May is waiting. She needs her papa." And Jonas Miller, bleeding in the Texas mud with children clinging to him like hope itself. Decided that was reason enough to live. 1 year later, the autumn sun painted the hills around the ranch in shades of gold and copper. Jonas Miller stood on his porch, watching Clara May work with a young colt in the corral. Her movements were confident now. Sure, speaking of hours spent learning the ways of horses, the colt, skittish at first, had come to trust her completely. "She's got the touch," said a voice beside him. Jonas glanced at Miguel, who'd grown 3 inches in the past year and lost much of the haunted look that had marked all of Crane's victims. The boy had become Jonas's shadow, eager to learn everything about ranching. "That she does." Jonas agreed. Natural-born horse trainer. The ranch had transformed in the months since that desperate chase through Skeleton Canyon. The barn, rebuilt with help from neighbors, was larger than before. New corrals held promising young horses, and the old house no longer echoed with emptiness. It rang with the voices of children. 8 of them, in the end. The ones rescued from Crane's operation who had no family to return to. Jonas hadn't planned on taking them all, but Clara May had looked at him with those eyes of hers and asked, "Where else will they go?" And that had been that. "Papa Jonas!" Lucy came running from the chicken coop, eggs carefully cradled in her apron. At 6, she'd appointed herself keeper of the chickens and took the job seriously. "Look, Henrietta laid 2 eggs today. That's fine work, Lucy girl." Jonas ruffled her hair, marveling as always at how easy affection came now. "Better get them to Miss Catherine. She's making her special cornbread for supper." Miss Catherine. That had been a surprise. The widow from town who'd volunteered to help with cooking had somehow never left. A handsome woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense manner. She'd taken one look at Jonas trying to cook for 9 people and declared it a miracle they hadn't all starved. "You need a woman's hand here," she'd said. "Lucky for you, I need a job and a roof. Seems we can help each other." That was 6 months ago. Lately, Jonas had noticed she smiled more when he was around, and he'd caught himself sprucing up before meals. Clara May watched it all with poorly hidden amusement. "Marshal Garrett's coming," Miguel announced, pointing to the road. Sure enough, the marshal's familiar figure approached on horseback. He visited regular-like, checking on the children and bringing news from Austin. Jonas suspected he also came for Miss Catherine's cooking, though the lawman would die before admitting it. "Sam," Jonas greeted him as he dismounted. "You're just in time for supper." "Wouldn't want to impose," Garrett said, already eyeing the kitchen door. "Miss Catherine's making cornbread." "Well, if you insist." They gathered around the long table that Jonas and Miguel had built to accommodate their expanded family. Clara May said grace, as she always did, her voice clear and strong. Jonas watched the faces around the table. Miguel, Lucy, the twins Rosa and Rita, Steady William, who wanted to be a lawman, Quiet James, who had a way with plants, Little Thomas, who followed Clara May everywhere, and Rebecca, who'd started calling him Grandpa Jonas. "Any news from Austin?" Jonas asked as they ate. "The last of the trials finished," Garrett reported. "Sheriff Dawson got 10 years hard labor. The rest of Crane's men, those that survived, got similar or worse. The trading post land has been officially seized. You still interested in buying it?" Jonas glanced at Clara May, who nodded eagerly. "We are planning to tear down every last building and start fresh. Make it a proper horse ranch. Going to need help running 2 spreads," Miss Catherine observed. "Been thinking on that," Jonas said. "William's old enough to take on real responsibility. Figured he could oversee the day-to-day at the new place. With Miguel helping, I'd ride between both, make sure everything's running smooth." William's face lit up. "You trust me with that?" "Wouldn't say it if I didn't." After supper, as the younger children cleared the table and Miss Catherine supervised dishwashing, Jonas and Clara May walked out to visit the small cemetery on the hill. They did this every Sunday, bringing fresh flowers from Rebecca's garden. "Think they'd be happy?" Clara May asked as they stood before the graves of Martha and Sarah Miller. "Your wife and daughter. Think they'd be glad about all this?" Jonas put his arm around her shoulders. "I know they would. Martha always said this house was too quiet. And Sarah, he smiled at the memory. Sarah would have loved having brothers and sisters. Would have bossed you all around something terrible. I would have liked that, Clara May said softly. Being bossed by a sister. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. A year ago, Jonas had been a walking dead man, and Clara May a starving child begging for crumbs. Now they were father and daughter in all but blood, though Judge Harwick, a real judge this time, had promised to make it official next month. "Papa Jonas," Clara May said, "remember what you told me that first night? That I could have everything?" "I remember. Did you know then that everything meant a family, brothers and sisters and Miss Catherine, and a home that's loud and messy and wonderful?" Jonas thought back to that moment, a desperate child asking for crumbs and him promising her the world. "No," he said honestly. "I didn't know, but I think maybe God knew. Maybe he sent you to save me as much as I saved you." Clara May hugged him tight. "We saved each other." As they walked back to the house, Jonas could hear the evening sounds of his ranch children laughing, horses nickering, Miss Catherine calling everyone in before dark. The window glowed warm with lamplight, and he could see shadows moving inside, a tableau of the life he'd thought lost forever. "Race you back," Clara May challenged, and took off running. Jonas laughed, really laughed, and gave chase, his old wounds protesting but his heart light. She let him almost catch her before spurting ahead, reaching the porch just as Miss Catherine opened the door. "You two coming in or planning to run around in the dark like wild things?" she asked, but her smile was fond. "Coming in," Jonas said, not even breathing hard. He paused at the threshold, looking back once at the vast Texas sky, then forward at the warm chaos of his home. Clara May had already disappeared inside, her voice joining the others in some debate about whose turn it was to read the bedtime story. "Jonas?" Miss Catherine touched his arm gently. "You all right?" "More than all right," he said, and meant it. Inside. Miguel was trying to teach Lucy a Spanish lullaby while the twins argued over a checkers game. William helped James with his letters. Patient as always. Thomas had climbed into Clara May's lap, demanding a story about horses. Rebecca was sneaking cookies from the jar when she thought no one was looking. "Papa Jonas," Thomas called out. "Clara May says you know the best horse stories. That so?" Jonas settled into his chair, the same one where he'd kept lonely vigil a lifetime ago. "Well, I might know one or two." "Tell the one about Duchess and the flood," Lucy demanded. "No, the one about the wild stallion," Miguel countered. "How about," Jonas said, looking at Clara May with a wink, "I tell you about a little girl who asked for crumbs and got a family instead." The room quieted, all eyes on him. Clara May smiled, that transformative smile that had become as essential to his days as sunrise. Once upon a time. Jonas began. On the hottest afternoon of the year, a brave little girl came to a lonely ranch. As he told their story, carefully edited for young ears, Jonas marveled at how much could change in a single year. A heart he'd thought dead forever now beat strong with purpose. A house that had echoed with ghosts now rang with life. And a little girl who'd asked for nothing but crumbs had indeed gotten everything and given him everything in return. Outside, the stars emerged one by one in the vast Texas sky. Inside, surrounded by the family they'd built from sorrow and hope, Jonas Miller and Clara May were home. Thank you all for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reflections mean the world to us, and I look forward to our continued journey together through the American frontier.